All right, strap in, everyone, because today we are taking a deep dive into the day after Roswell.
Ooh, this is a good one.
Yeah, and we only pick the good ones for deep dives. You guys have sent in some excerpts, and wow, just wow. This book, it's by retired Army Colonel Philip J. Corso,
Okay.
and he claims that he helped seed alien technology, like from Roswell, into everyday life.
That's a big claim. It really grabs you right from the start. I mean, Corso's saying he had this crucial part in taking tech, recovered from the Roswell incident, and basically like weaving it into our world today.
Okay, so expert, help me out here. Where do we even start?
Well, I think before we jump into all the specifics of the tech, which we will do, we should probably take a look at Corso himself. Like, who is this guy?
Right.
He really leans on his military and intelligence background to kind of like build up his credibility. I mean, we're talking about, working with Senator Strom Thurmond, spending time at the National Security Council. He was even involved in Operation Paperclip, which, if you don't know, was that program where they recruited all those German scientists after World War II.
Yeah, I mean, he's name-dropping some pretty big names there.
Yeah.
But, I mean, does that automatically make his Roswell story true?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? A background in intelligence, I mean, think about it, that could make him like a really good storyteller, someone who's really good at putting together a narrative, even if maybe it's, not completely accurate.
Okay, so let's set Corso aside for a second and focus on Roswell.
Sure.
What does he actually say happened there?
Well, he really paints this picture of intense secrecy and intimidation after the alleged crash. He talks about, witnesses being threatened, accounts just disappearing, like poof. And the military, they kept changing their story.
Yeah, it almost feels like something out of like a spy movie or something.
Exactly.
He also mentions how, like, some journalists who tried to investigate the whole thing were basically forced to retract their stories, told to follow the official line, or else, I mean, we have to remember what was going on back then. This is 1947.
Oh, yeah. The world's still trying to recover from World War II, and the Cold War, that's just starting to heat up.
Right. So the idea of, like, this unknown force, potentially hostile, entering U.S. airspace, that would have been terrifying.
Totally. I mean, Corso even compares it to that War of the Worlds radio broadcast a few years earlier, the one that caused mass panic because people thought Martians were invading.
Oh, yeah. Like, everyone thought it was real.
Right. And Corso suggests that maybe the government, because they remembered that incident so vividly, they were extra cautious about how they dealt with Roswell.
Okay, so that makes sense. Avoid mass panic, right?
But then it also makes you wonder, did they choose secrecy just to avoid that panic, or was there something else they were trying to hide?
Ooh, good question. So let's just say for a minute that Corso's right about Roswell. What happened to all that tech that was supposedly recovered?
Yeah, this is where his story really takes a turn. He says that his mission was to take these pieces of tech, these artifacts, and, kind of slip them into different research and development teams.
So, like, subtly guide technological progress.
Exactly.
From behind the scenes. Wow.
Imagine that job. You can't just go around shouting, hey, we've got alien tech. You'd be locked up.
Right, right.
So instead, you have to kind of nudge existing projects in the right direction, plant these little seeds, and just hope that something amazing comes out of it.
Okay, so what kind of tech are we talking about specifically? This is where it gets a little wild, right?
Yeah, well, he starts off with fiber optics. He describes how amazed he was by how the alien craft used this tech for light transmission. I mean, it was way beyond anything we had at the time.
Right.
And now, look around you. Fiber optics is basically the backbone of the internet. It's how we're having this conversation right now. We can stream movies, download music, have video calls.
All thanks to aliens, maybe.
Maybe. Corso seems to think so. And then there's integrated circuits, those tiny little chips that are in all our computers and smartphones.
Okay, so faster communication with fiber optics and smaller, more powerful computers because of these circuits?
What else?
Well, he mentions night vision, too. Says he gave a team at Fort Belvoir a sketch of this night viewer thing from the Roswell debris.
Okay.
And he claims that that really influenced their research.
Think about how night vision is used now. By the military, of course, law enforcement, even people who like to watch wildlife at night.
Right.
I mean, imagine being able to see in the dark, not with those bulky goggles we have now, but with something as simple as the eyepieces Corso says the alien medical officers were using. That's wild.
It's pretty mind-blowing, isn't it? I mean, could our modern night vision tech really be traced back to that? Okay, so we have fiber optics, integrated circuits, night vision. But Corso, he doesn't stop there. He also ties Roswell to lasers, food irradiation, and even this super strong, lightweight material he calls super tenacity fibers. It's like sci-fi stuff, but he's saying it all came from that crash.
It's a lot to take in, and we're going to delve into those technologies and more when we continue our deep dive in the next part.
Yeah, we'll pick up right where we left off, so stay tuned.
So, before we get to those other technologies that Corso talks about, I think it's worth exploring this idea of secrecy.
Okay.
Like this idea that the government, maybe they're keeping secrets, not just from the public, us regular folks, but maybe even from other parts of the government itself.
Right, like the need to know thing.
Exactly. He tells this story about being stationed at Fort Riley in 1947, right after Roswell. He was the post-duty officer one night, and he stumbles upon this classified storage building, super secret.
Okay, wait. What led him there? Does he suspect something? Or was it just random?
Well, one of his men, a soldier named Brownie, he was supposed to be on guard duty, but he had gone AWOL. And Corso, he finds him inside this building, hunched over, reading all these documents.
Okay, yeah. That's pretty suspicious already.
Right. And get this, the building was filled with all these crates, right?
Yeah.
And they had all these bizarre materials. Corso even describes seeing a small humanoid body submerged in this weird gelatinous fluid.
Whoa.
Yeah. He claims this was his first, direct encounter with what he believed was an alien being.
So even with his background, all his intelligence training, he was still kept in the dark about Roswell until this point.
That's what he says.
Wow, I can't even imagine.
It's kind of creepy, right? You think about how far the secrecy went. Even someone like Corso, with his clearance, his experience, he wasn't allowed to know the full picture.
It makes you think, right? If they could keep something that big a secret, what else is hidden away somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, it raises some big questions about, who's really in control?
Right.
If a small group of people can keep something like this under wraps, operate totally outside the normal channels, I mean, that's scary. What does that say about transparency? About accountability?
Okay, that's a good point. So let's get back to the tech for a minute.
Sure.
Corso mentions being really fascinated by the laser technology found in the Roswell debris. He talks about how he saw its potential for all sorts of things, from range finding to weapon systems. And of course, today, lasers are everywhere.
Totally. Think about it. We use lasers for everything now. Scanning groceries at the checkout,
Right.
Performing surgery, even transmitting data through those fiber optic cables we were talking about earlier.
Oh, yeah. So he's basically suggesting that lasers could be doubly impactful.
Right. Because of their role in fiber optics A&D as, standalone tools.
Okay, so that's fiber optics, integrated circuits, night vision, lasers. Next up, he mentions food irradiation. Using radiation to kill bacteria and make food last longer. It's a little out there.
It does seem like a stretch, yeah. But remember, Corso's whole thing is that he was trying to find these everyday uses for alien tech, things that wouldn't raise eyebrows.
Right, like hide in plain sight.
Exactly. So maybe food irradiation, which was already being researched back then, was the perfect cover.
So maybe aliens are responsible for keeping our food fresh longer.
It's a wild thought, isn't it? This everyday thing could have its roots in a crashed spaceship. It definitely makes you think.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We talked about those super tenacity fibers too, remember? That super strong material, Corso says, was like alien spider silk. But how does he explain how all of this stayed secret for so long? I mean, wouldn't people have noticed something?
Well, he says the Cold War was the perfect cover.
Oh, okay.
Everyone was so focused on the Soviets, on developing new weapons, new technologies, that it created this environment where pushing the boundaries was not only encouraged, but expected. It was anything goes.
So under the guise of national security, they could basically pour resources into researching alien tech without anyone really questioning it.
That's the idea. And if we step back and think about the bigger picture, it kind of makes you wonder, was the Cold War, with all its tension and fear, was that just a smokescreen for something even bigger? Humanity's first encounter with a truly advanced civilization.
That's a chilling thought.
And it brings us to, I think, the most intriguing part of Corso's story.
Okay, let's hear it.
Project Horizon.
Project Horizon.
Yeah, the alleged plan to build a military base on the moon.
Oh, wow. I've heard whispers about that, but I never really looked into it. Tell me more.
It's a fascinating story. He claims it was conceived back in the late 1950s, well before the Apollo missions. And it wasn't just some small outpost either. He's talking about underground living quarters, a nuclear power plant, even a system for launching projectiles from the moon. Imagine that.
Yeah, it sounds like something straight out of science fiction.
Right. But Corso insists he was directly involved in the planning. He even writes about testifying before Congress about it, arguing for its strategic importance. Now, of course, whether Project Horizon actually existed, well, that's still up for debate.
Right.
But Corso's account, when you look at it in the context of everything else we've talked about, the Cold War, the potential threat of extraterrestrials, I mean, it takes on this whole new meaning. It's like he's saying the space race wasn't just about national pride or beating the Soviets.
It was about something much bigger.
Yeah, like maybe it was about defending ourselves from something we didn't fully understand.
And that's a pretty unsettling thought as we wrap up this part of the deep dive. But I'm sure we'll have even more to unpack when we come back.
Yeah.
Expert, you always leave us with something to think about. Okay, so we've talked about Colonel Corso's story. We've dug into the Roswell incident and all that wild tech he claims to have, kind of pushed along.
Yeah.
Fiber optics, lasers, even food irradiation.
Yeah.
And then there's that Project Horizon, the moon base idea. It's a lot. But now I want to bring it back down to earth for a minute. Like, what does all this mean for, the average person listening to this here in 2024? What's the takeaway?
Well, it's easy to get lost in the what-ifs of Corso's story. The alien tech, the government conspiracies, all that.
Yeah.
But I think the real value, the thing we should all be thinking about, is how this makes us think. Like, regardless of whether you believe Corso or not, he's forcing us to ask some really tough questions about, how we navigate a world where information is, let's be honest, often controlled and manipulated.
Right. He keeps going back to this idea of compartmentalization, of people in power operating in secret, making decisions that could affect all of us without us even knowing about it. And that's not just some sci-fi thing that's happening right now all around us.
Exactly. Think about it. The news you read, the stuff you buy, the laws your government passes, there are always layers, hidden agendas, different sides trying to get you to believe their version of the story.
Okay, so what do we do about it? How do we stay informed?
Well, it starts with being skeptical, but not like cynical. Skeptical in a smart way.
What do you mean?
Like, question your sources. Don't just take everything at face value, especially when it comes from people in power. Look for different perspectives. Get the whole picture.
Right. Corso, he had that intelligence background, so he was trained to think that way.
Right.
But even H.E. was surprised by what he claims to have seen.
Exactly. So it's not just about being skeptical. It's about being curious. Dig deeper. Look for the context. Ask yourself, who benefits from this information being presented this way?
Good point. I guess Corso's story, even if it's not all true, it really highlights how power often operates in the shadows. Governments, corporations, any group with an agenda, there's always more to the story than what they're telling you.
Right. So this deep dive, it's kind of a call to action, I think. Don't just sit back and absorb information. Be active. Get involved.
Okay, I like that. So how does all this tie back into those crazy technologies Corso talks about?
Well, think about it. If everyday things we take for granted now, like fiber optics or integrated circuits or lasers, if those were influenced by alien tech, what LSE in our world might have these hidden origins?
Oh, that's a good one. It really makes you look at everything differently, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, maybe we're surrounded by technology that's far more advanced than we realize, and the people who developed it, maybe they don't always have our best interests in mind.
That's kind of a scary thought.
Yeah.
So as you go about your day, just, pay attention, look around, ask questions. You might be surprised by what you find.
Exactly. And if you find something really interesting, something that makes you think, send it our way. We're always up for another deep dive.
Until next time, everyone, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep exploring the world with open eyes and, a healthy dose of skepticism. Thanks for listening.